So yesterday, President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed Parliament. He said that a Ukrainian victory would be a victory over the concept of war itself, and that it would send a message to those who would seek to challenge the global order. Giving our helmets in Parliament a helmet was apparently enough of a ceremonial gesture to secure military training, aid, and even fighter jets, all paid for by us, the people that actually work for this country. Dominique's here today, because you requested specifically to cover this, to discuss with me why exactly the West seems obsessed with funneling all its money to Ukraine.
I mean, it's a really, really interesting question because firstly, you just have to look at whether or not things make sense. And they don't make sense. I mean, the idea that's being continually pushed in the media is that Zelensky is this war hero. That's why he goes around in that green get-up as if he's this war general fighting for freedom.
Yeah, his H&M custom outfit.
Yeah, I mean, number one, Ukraine is an extremely corrupt country. Number two, it's not a democracy. The guy is effectively a tyrant, banning news organisations that he doesn't like.
And the rival parties.
Yeah, attacking churches that are quote-unquote, associated with Russia or, pushing Russian disinformation. And thirdly, Russia is winning. And I'm sorry, some people might be offended by this. They might be like, oh, because Russia couldn't take Kiev, that means that, we're going to win. No, Russia is winning the war. They've taken up considerable territories, particularly in the east of Ukraine, which is the area of Ukraine that Russia wants already. To make matters worse, even the IMF projected that Russia's GDP will actually grow in 2023.
Yeah, it's because they're instantiating a parallel economy, which we will talk about in a moment.
They can afford to fund this war. The facts are that Ukraine can't. And in regards to our military, Boris the buffoon demanding that we send all of our, he was telling us to send them all of our jets, all of our tanks, everything, send it all to Ukraine. I want to know who is paying this buffoon to basically campaign for us to remove all of our defense stocks, because the US Secretary General, there's a story about this in Sky recently, said to Ben Wallace, our defense minister, that, that we wouldn't actually last in an armed, like a full-scale war. Our ammunition would last a few days, he said. A few days. That's a problem. Meanwhile, we're running around offering fighter jets when, one, our stockpiles are depleting and we cannot actually replenish them quick enough. We've had to import them. And number two, in terms of the fighter jets, we don't even have enough pilots to be able to train people to use the fighter jets we have already. So how are we sending them to Ukraine? That's partly why Rishi Sunak is saying that it's a long-term commitment, because we simply don't actually have the capability. So who is pushing this? What is the agenda? And I think really there is a wider agenda here. I don't know what it is. And I think it's to do with, I don't know,
I think it's
grinding
financial sunk costs.
Yeah,
personally.
but grinding Europe to a halt. I mean, there was a whistleblower that came out recently. I think his name's Steve Hirsch. His second name is definitely Hirsch. He's an investigative journalist, Pulitzer Prize winner. He's come out and accused Joe Biden of being directly responsible for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline attack. So it seems that America has interest in wanting to grind Europe to a halt. The question is why?
Well, if you want to bribe the military-industrial complex, you're going to need a job so that they can tax you. If you do fancy a job, go over to lotuseaters.com careers page, and if you're able to be a web developer, cheers. I'm waiting for the call from Daily Wire. You can sign up and send us an email. If you're qualified, you will have to work from the office in Swindon or commute in for 5 hours a day like I do. But we're a good fun office here.
5 hours?
Yeah, 2.5 hours each way.
Oh, okay. Good for you. That's a commitment.
Yeah, well, Swindon's more horrible than London somehow. So
I mean, more horrible than London. Okay, yeah. I thought you were going to say
I'm in a suburb. I'm not in central. I'm not dodging knives left and right. I'm fine. So if we go to the next, this is just a quick summary of what happened at yesterday's meeting when Rishi and the poison dwarf himself nearly kissed. So the UK training of Ukrainian forces is set to be expanded to cover fighter jet pilots and Marines, as you said. The UK also announced a fresh round of sanctions targeting Russia and thereby itself. The latest sanctions target IT companies as well as manufacturers of military equipment such as drones and helicopter parts. plans have been announced to train Ukrainian pilots to fly NATO standard fighter jets in the future, a key request from Ukraine.
In the future.
Yeah. Number 10 said Mr. Sunak would be offering to provide Ukraine with longer range capabilities to disrupt Russia's ability to target Ukraine's critical national infrastructure. It added that British training would be scaled up this year with a further 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers set to be trained. I'm sure all of those have wonderful politics, and not a single one will be caught on Sky News driving past the camera with an Azov battalion logo. So how much of money have we currently sent to Ukraine? We can go from the Express's summary here. Since the start of the war, the US has given the largest amount of military aid to Ukraine, totaling $22.9 billion, or that's euros there, so it's 20.5 billion pounds by November 20th, according to the Kiel Institute. 2022 marks the first time since the aftermath of the Second World War that a European country has been the top recipient of US foreign aid in a year. The UK is second on the list, having pledged £3.7 billion. A Downing Street spokesperson said the Prime Minister was dedicated to ensuring Ukraine wins this war.
And you know what's funny is that we actually don't know where all of this is going. It's completely unregulated.
There was a woman who was a wife of some sort of official caught walking across the Polish border with a suitcase full of cash.
Interesting, but not surprising. And even there were some reports that weapons from Ukraine are ending up in the arms of Boko Haram in Nigeria. Yeah, the Nigerian, I don't know, did they have a president or a prime minister? The president said that weapons were appearing on the black market and actually arming these insurrection groups. So,
right.
yeah, there you go.
Strange.
When you write a blank check, it turns out that you actually end up arming terrorist groups. Sort of similar to what happened in Afghanistan.
Well, I was going to say the Chinese have been buying up the American military equipment from the Afghanis from a discounted price. If the Chinese and the Russians are in an economic pact, are we really believing those Black Hawks won't be ending up on the Russian front line at any point?
And it's just suspicious how Bad just left them all there. But, I mean, I guess that's a conversation for another day.
Yep. Well, so let's go to an update on the death toll, shall we? Oh, no, actually, we've got a clip from Zelensky himself. Let's listen to him saying...
We will win.
We know Russia will lose.
We don't.
And we really know the victory will change the world. And this will be a change that the world has long needed.
What change is that?
The United Kingdom is marching with us towards the most important victory of our lifetime. It will be a victory over the very idea of the war. After we win together, any aggressor, it doesn't matter, big or small, will know what awaits him if he attacks international order. Any aggressor who will try to push the Bandaris by force, who will inflict destruction and death on other peoples, who will try to endure his dictatorship at the expense of other people's blood in criminal and unprovoked wars as the Kremlin does. Any aggressor is going to lose. Ladies and gentlemen, we have already achieved remarkable results, and we must make every effort to turn our achievements into the foundations of the future global security architecture. The world needs your leadership, Britain, just as it needs Ukrainian bravery.
So the Ukrainian victory will not only destroy the idea of war itself, a very progressive idea of an end of history where we're all living in utopia, but it'll also be the foundation of future global security. So they're admitting to reconstructing a world order based off of their approach to ending the Ukraine war.
So it's not about democracy then, is it?
Well, no, only if you define democracy in the sort of Leninist vanguard aspect of democracy over the proletariat by a bunch of Marxist ideologues that decide how we run our lives. So that would be the way. I do want to express, of course, the fact that I wouldn't really fancy living in Russia or Ukraine,
No.
and that there's a bunch of dead on both sides. I mean, the last death toll was estimated by France 24 at 180,000 killed Russian soldiers, and Ukrainians 100,000 military and 30,000 dead civilians. So they're kind of neck and neck at the moment. And
I mean, I don't believe those figures, and namely because they come from France 24.
well, yeah, fair enough.
Which, I mean, they have an interest in making sure that people believe that, Slava Ukraini. But if you look at other sources, particularly apparently just this month alone, that they've lost about 6,500 soldiers. But obviously, I will be transparent. This comes from the Russian defense minister, which, fair enough. But you do have to actually look at what both sides are saying, because in terms of the losses in weaponry that Ukraine has incurred, the Russian Defense Ministry has said that they have managed to destroy about 26 planes, which sort of makes sense, because why is Zelensky coming to Britain to demand planes?
Yeah.
So
And the thing is, I'm willing to listen to both sides of statistics, mainly because I don't really have a dog in the fight, other than I don't want to pay for it.
for me, it was just when I first saw what was going on, there's going to be a war in Ukraine. The narrative around it really reminded me of the narrative around COVID.
Yes.
And I've learned that if the mainstream media is in unison with one particular topic and the propaganda is,
Relentless.
yeah, that something weird is going on. And really, if Russia were in such dire straits, the Russian defense minister wouldn't be saying that their special operation will end by this year. Which suggests that they're sort of setting out what they want to do. And this isn't, I would say a controversial opinion. There's so many people from mainstream news outlets that are actually saying, in the East, Russian troops are hammering, and that conflict doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. And they have made several gains. So I think just balance is probably needed instead of turning everyone into a warmongering zealot.
Yeah, but that's not very profitable, is it? I mean,
No.
then you won't be able to have Raytheon show up at the Conservative Party conference and you can pose their missile launchers in a booth, which actually happened. I'm
Really?
not making that up. Yeah, it was
Oh,
right by the cloakroom. Wasn't
God.
great. So, just in case we were accused of being conspiracy theorists here, I thought I'd bring up the Council on Foreign Relations, because if you're talking about the construction of a new world order with a great reset, or that Zelensky is trying to defend or reinstitute a world order with the defense of Ukraine, then you'll be accused of making things up. But there is actually a liberal world order that they're currently trying to conserve. Even Joe Biden said this and said there's going to be a new world order. So this is the conception that they're trying to hold on to. Perhaps. The United States, working closely with the United Kingdom and others, established the liberal world order in the wake of World War II. The goal was to ensure that the conditions that had led to 2 world wars in 30 years would never again rise, almost like a war on the concept of war for itself.
Yeah, and I mean, these terms like New World Order, Liberal World Order, these are established concepts in international relations anyway. I mean, I did it for my degree. So it's not like this is just conspiracy theory. These are genuine concepts that have been born out of a sort of American supremacy. But I think what is interesting is that this liberal world order that, the US is apparently trying to protect, is it really? Because I think that the greatest threat to this liberal world order has been the integration of China. And now we know that China doesn't want to be a part of this liberal world order. It actually wants to do the opposite, and it wants to actually be on top and replace America. The question is America happy to do that? I would say so. It's happy to import everything and anything from China in the name of climate change. I would think. Our solar panels that we love to bang on about, where do they come from?
80% of battery manufacturing comes from China.
Exactly. Yep. So we're very much happy to prop up the Chinese economy whilst pretending we're interested in preserving the liberal world order. If you ask me, I think it's the opposite.
Yep. So, not a conspiracy theory then. Good. Glad about that. What about the peace deals? Any prospect of the war ending anytime soon? Well, we have here a tweet from Michael Tracy, who documents how one of the former Israeli prime ministers tried to negotiate a peace deal.
Bless you. I don't know.
Sorry.
Can you say that?
Bit of a cough, unfortunately. Tried to negotiate a peace deal early on between Ukraine and Russia, and the Americans interceded and said, no, thank you very much. He said both sides very much wanted a ceasefire. Naftali Bennett said, former Israeli PM, but the US blocked it. On March 5th, 2022, 9 days after the invasion, Bennett secretly went to Moscow and met with Putin. Bennett says that Putin agreed to two big concessions, renouncing the denazification of Ukraine, understood to mean regime change, and renouncing the disarmament of Ukraine. Bennett says that simultaneously to this, again, based on his direct, intensive involvement with day-to-day negotiations, Zelensky had agreed to a big concession and would officially renounce NATO membership. Anything I did was coordinated down to the last detail with the US, Germany, and France, said Bennett. Bennett says he was in constant contact with Jake Sullivan, sometimes Antony Blinken, sometimes Biden himself. There was a decision by the West to keep striking Putin, he said, and it's clear he's talking about the US as a decisive player, more decisive than Ukraine or Russia.
Interesting, because there was a similar story in November last year, and that was specifically about Boris Johnson.
Yes.
Apparently, that was what his performative trip to Ukraine was about. It was about stopping Zelensky from making any concessions to Putin. And then soon after that, you heard Zelensky screaming and shouting about Crimea. And we know that Russia, illegally, according to us, have had Crimea since 2014.
Yes.
There is no way that the war is going to end anytime soon if you then are starting to talk about Crimea, which suggests that you're not actually interested in the war ending anytime soon, which also suggests that there's a bigger agenda at play, because especially with the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, it's all very focused on energy. And what are we obsessed with at the moment? It's net zero.
Yeah.
And I think the two probably come hand in hand. I think this war is a convenient vehicle to accelerate that agenda.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is well, if not manufactured, then the Rahm Emanuel style crisis of never let a good crisis go to waste. And you're seeing the bifurcation of the global economy into the assets and resource-backed economy of BRICS. So the Saudis looking to trade more directly with Russia and get off the petrodollar, the Russians looking to do gold for oil exchanges, the Chinese having lots of their manufacturing capabilities and access to loads of the rare earth minerals in the 140 countries they've got under Belt and Road. Meanwhile, in the West, we're rapidly destroying the American petrodollar, which has been the mechanism for America to seize the global hegemon after how many years? We're trying to get onto renewables, which requires Chinese manufacturing and all those minerals that the Chinese have, unless we send Elon up into space and he mines asteroids anytime soon, but highly unlikely. And so we are committing economic and energy security suicide and acquiescing to the other side of the planet all of the resources that we need. And so we're becoming a very dependent economic bloc.
Exactly. And, you know, I really don't think this level of incompetence is by accident. But it reminds me of when you said never let a good crisis go to waste. You know, the advent of 15-minute cities.
Yes.
I was reading through the website that advocates for these things. And, you know, conveniently it said that COVID-19 presented the perfect opportunity in order for us to realise the importance of us being closer together. And it's just, it makes me sick how people actually swallow this.
Yeah, the policy that was designed to imprison you in your home made us realise we need those prisons instantiated out on the streets so that you're fined if you go anywhere beyond the yard. Did you see the video from the Oxford City Council when, as soon as people started posting about this online, they said, we need to address this. This is misinformation. This is a conspiracy theory. It's just a couple of traffic cameras, no actual barriers. Even they started putting bollards in the streets that people had to remove.
And people are removing them. And what was interesting is that me and others, we posted about this, and then there seemed to be this designated journalist that wrote a Reuters article.
Oh, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
A Reuters article saying, "Oh, hey, wait a minute, I fact-checked this. This isn't a climate lockdown. It's simply mechanisms to
traffic control measures to stop you moving anywhere.
Traffic control measures." And it's like, do you realise how ridiculous you are? But I just thought it was funny that this journalist was floating around commenting on each and every one of our posts, which suggests that narrative control.
They've got to confect a consensus to manufacture.
It's not just in Oxford, it's spreading all across the country.
There's Bath, it's Canterbury, there's loads of places with the ULEZ zones as well.
That is the next V passport. I mean,
yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's digital ID coming in 2023. The consultation's actually going on, so yeah, I've already directed some people to give their responses. It's going to be passed no matter what we say, but
it doesn't matter.
All I did was filled out the questionnaire and then posted on Twitter to prove that I filled out the questionnaire and said, okay, if everyone else does the same, when they eventually pass it, even though the overwhelming amount of responses were negative, we've got some ground to go, well, hang on a minute here. people actually didn't want this. You're foisting on us
Yeah.
anyway. There was also Joe Biden, apparently, according to a German newspaper, had offered Putin 20% of Ukraine to end the war early on. So the White House and the CIA have responded to a report that CIA Director William Burns offered Russian President Vladimir Putin a fifth of Ukraine's territory to end the war in Ukraine as part of a peace plan drawn up on behalf of
When
President
I
Biden.
was saying this, that, you know, in order to sort of end this, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have to give up some territory. Territory that, you know, Russia's had for quite a while anyway. And everyone's like, oh no, you're paid by Russia. And Sleepy Joe is apparently offering 20%.
Well, Sleepy Joe's literally paid by China because via his son's investment firm, they were selling off oil to the Chinese.
Yeah, good old Hunter Biden, but we're not allowed to talk about him.
Oh, we will later, don't worry. A CIA official told Newsweek that claims in the report from the Swiss-German newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung that Burns took a secret trip to Moscow in January and that there was a peace proposal put forward by the director on behalf of the White House were completely false, apparently. Last month, Burns travelled in secret to meet and brief Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, the Washington Post reported. Burns is said to have submitted a plan in mid-January to put an end to the war, which began on February 24th, 2022. The story was reported by NZZ on Thursday, citing high-ranking German foreign politicians. One of the politicians told NZZ that he believes it is becoming increasingly clear that the US is preparing for a long war of attrition. He raised concerns that Germany would suffer economically, financially, and militarily from such a war. And if we can go on to this video here, which you can watch for £5 subscribing to the website, which is Dan's Brokenomics series, Dan essentially breaks down how the Ukrainian war is actually quite beneficial to the Americans because America, obviously, taking out Detroit, all of their car manufacturing plants, cozying up to Russia. They're quite worried about the geopolitical security implications of relying on Russia for all their oil. Instead, the US can become, for a limited time, between now and the net zero deadline, which they tightly want to control. Biden said we only need oil for 10 more years in the State of the Union speech, for example. America could become the leading oil exporter and control the entire bloc of Europe and ensure that the euro is no longer a competitor to the dollar. So they can, for a short amount of time, retain the dominance of petrodollar and then switch it to renewables.
It's so interesting that you say that because after Nord Stream 2 was blown up, America actually said we have this pipeline. I can't remember which one it is, so I'm not, but if people look it up, they can probably find it. But after that, America had an alternative that coincidentally benefited them the most, which is interesting. And before the pipeline was actually blown up, Joe Biden did say, trust me, we can put a stop to it.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, it's nothing like the Americans have ever conducted any sort of subterfuge efforts on foreign soil before,
It's just
especially
not
not to topple regimes in Iraq or Libya when they said they wanted to get off the petrodollar. They weren't happy. It's not like there was a pipeline in Syria between the Russians that they didn't like either. Weird, that conspiracy theory.
It's
I'm
conspiracy theory.
There's also another conspiracy theory here, just to almost finish up on that. The Americans and Ukrainians since 2005 have been investing in Soviet-era bio facility labs, which is quite weird. In 2005, Senator Obama, not President, Senator Obama, kind of strange that a junior Chicago senator would go over and investigate Ukraine.
Yeah.
And Senator Lugar visited former Soviet biological and chemical weapons facilities in Ukraine and established the US deep state roots there. From the Washington Post article that's been linked in this, it's there, you can go and read it. The United States and Ukraine agreed yesterday to work jointly to prevent the spread of biological weapons, signing a pact that clears the way for Ukraine's government to receive US aid to improve security at facilities where dangerous microbes are kept. The agreement, the result of more than a year of negotiations, was announced by Senators Richard Lugar and Barack Obama during a visit to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. The senators credited Ukraine's reformist leaders, ushered into power by last fall's Orange Revolution, with breaking bureaucratic resistance to the pact. One lab is to receive funding is the I'm going to have really hard time pronouncing this, Meshinikov Anti-Plague Scientific and Research Institute
Just
in the
do
Black
it in a
Sea.
Russian accent.
Meshinikov. There we go.
Meshinikov.
Fantastic. In the port of Odessa. What are the numbers, Mason? The institute was part of a Cold War network of anti-plague stations that supplied highly lethal pathogens to Soviet bioweapons factories.
Yeah.
And then we know that President Obama, in thanking the 2005 government for being more pliable, one of his chiefs of staff, Victoria Nuland, was involved in that 2014 phone call that ended up getting Zelensky into power.
And
how weird is that?
Yeah, and it was this Victoria Nuland who's on record on camera saying there are US biolabs in Ukraine. And, they phrase it as, we're not dealing with deadly pathogens here. You know, although they've got things like anthrax in there. There was this one news report, this journalist going into this biolab, and it was this really small biolab. Didn't really seem to have any sort of security. And the lady goes that when Russia invaded, they had anthrax there that they actually had to destroy in this like tiny machine. Anthrax. And the journalist was like, yeah, like, do you know what anthrax is?
Yeah. Yeah, not wise to have that very unsecured, is it? The interesting thing as well is that there was... So the US firm that took over it was Metabiota, and it was awarded a grant by the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Hunter Biden's investment firm fundraised and invested in Metabiota.
Ding,
And
ding,
then
ding.
If we go down to just tweet 14, please, John, because this is a really interesting one. Volodymyr Zelensky ordered the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense to destroy all state documents affiliated with US biolab companies Metabiota and Batel. So he deleted all the documents, and we have some here from the orders that have been translated. So there might be some sunken costs, which is why the Americans want to prolong this war, as do the Brits, because we'll wrap up on our very own favourite Tobias Ellwood, the man who was part of the Ministry of Defence's 77th Brigade, which recently spied on Peter Hitchens, Judy Hartley Brewer.
And that was a conspiracy theory once as well. Majid Nawaz said it first.
Yes.
Although, you know, Big Brother Watch is the one who did the report. Majid Nawaz said this way before.
Oh, if you keep saying things like that, Tobias Ellwood won't unblock you.
Yeah.
If we can just listen to his own words.
We are now at war in Europe. We need to move to a war footing. We are involved in that. We've mobilized our procurement processes. We're gifting equipment. We need to face Russia directly and rather than leaving Ukraine to do all the work.
So he just wants to institute a British ground war in Ukraine.
Which we're not in any position to do. We're just not.
But even if we were, I'm not content to send blood and treasure overseas and have young, brave British men die for either corrupt Eastern European country.
Exactly.
I'm just not happy
I'd much
for it.
rather focus on what is going on here. Please, someone.
But unfortunately, we're not going to get that, and instead we're going to be made to pay for the military-industrial complex forever. So, like any forever war, peace is never the most profitable course of action.
Nope.
Great stuff.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the content that's on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this one on libertarianism. If you'd like to find out what else Lotus is putting out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.